You are on HOA Justice Stories. The warning sticker hit the glass while I was still talking. I am glad you made it. Let me tell you what happened when an HOA tried to tow me into oblivion and learned the hard way that I keep every receipt, every email, and every gate log they thought nobody would ever check. Karen pointed at my car like it was contraband and yelled that she was cleaning up the community today. I do not care what the last person did, she said, her voice sharp enough to carry 3 driveways down. The tow truck idled behind her, amber strobes painting the wet pavement in jagged streaks, and the driver sat in the cab with his clipboard, watching like this was routine. I had just pulled in from a 12-hour shift, my phone battery at 6%, and the last thing I needed was Deborah Miller, Special Assessment Coordinator for Lakeview Crest Commons Association in Spokane Valley, Washington, standing in my driveway with a coffee tumbler held like a gavel and a tow authorization placard already magnetized to the truck door. She slapped a warning sticker on my windshield before I even got out of the car, the adhesive making a sharp snap against the glass. "That is your final notice," she said. "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I stepped out slowly, keeping my voice level. "What is the violation?" She tapped the tumbler against her thigh and gestured at my car like it was self-evident. "Guest parking abuse, overnight violations, no visible decal, and you blocked access to the fire lane turnaround for 47 minutes on Tuesday." I work in insurance fraud investigation, and I know a padding job when I hear one. None of that was true except maybe the decal, which I had stuck inside the windshield per the original rules, but she was already pivoting to the next threat. The tow operator rolled down his window halfway, waiting for the signal. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. The battery warning flashed. Deborah saw it and smiled. "Go ahead and record," she said. "It will not change anything. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry, and the board backs me every time." The smoke from a neighbor's grill drifted past, carrying the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid, and I could see a couple of people standing on their porches 2 houses down, watching. The tow truck driver shifted into gear, just a nudge forward, and the hydraulic whine filled the gap in the conversation. I stopped arguing and started collecting, because the endgame was already set. I just needed her to keep talking long enough to finish what I had started 3 days earlier, when I requested the full access log from the gate vendor and a copy of every tow authorization the association had issued in the last 6 months. She stepped closer. "You have 24 hours to remove the vehicle or we impound it and you pay the fees. If you do not like it, you can appeal to the board, but they meet in 3 weeks and the lien goes on your title tomorrow morning." I glanced at the tow operator. He looked away. That told me everything. I had been on the phone with the tow yard clerk 2 days earlier, and she had quietly admitted the HOA paperwork was sloppy. Half the authorizations missing signatures, dates wrong, vehicle descriptions copied and pasted. The vendor did not care as long as they got paid, but the clerk had seen enough of these blow up in small claims court that she was careful about what she said on the record. She had not given me documents, but she had confirmed the file was a mess when I asked the right questions. Deborah was still talking. "This is not personal," she said, which meant it absolutely was. "You are not special. Everyone follows the same rules." I nodded and kept the phone aimed at her face. "Then show me the rule," I said. "Show me the written policy that says I cannot park my own car in my own driveway overnight with a valid decal." She blinked. "The policy is the policy," she said. "It is in the handbook." "I have the handbook," I said. "It does not say that." She took a sip from the tumbler and looked at the tow operator. "Hook it," she said. The driver got out and walked around to the back of the truck, pulling a tire clamp from a storage bin. The metal clanked as he carried it over, and I could hear the ratchet mechanism clicking as he knelt by my front wheel. Deborah watched with her arms crossed, and I kept filming even though my battery was down to 4%. The clamp snapped shut with a heavy mechanical thunk, and the driver stood up, brushing his hands off on his pants. "That will be $350 to remove it," he said, not looking at me. "Plus 50 per day storage if we tow it to the yard." Deborah handed him a clipboard, and he signed something without reading it. I asked if I could see the authorization. He glanced at Deborah. She shook her head. "That is association business," she said. "You can request it through the proper channels." "I already did," I said, 3 days ago. I sent a written request under the Washington Homeowners Association Act for any and all records related to parking enforcement, tow authorizations, and gate access logs for my address. I am entitled to a response within 10 business days, and I am on day 3. She stiffened. "I do not know anything about that," she said. "Then you should check with the management company," I said, "because I sent it certified mail and I have the tracking number." The tow operator looked uncomfortable and started walking back to his truck. Deborah stayed put. "If you think you can lawyer your way out of a violation, you are wrong," she said. "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." The smoke thickened as someone adjusted their grill, and one of the neighbors walked over, an older man in a Seahawks jersey with a phone in his hand. "Everything okay here?" he asked. Deborah turned and gave him a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Just routine enforcement," she said. "Nothing to worry about." The man looked at the clamp on my wheel, then at me. "You need a witness?" he asked. I nodded. He stayed. Deborah's expression hardened. "This does not concern you," she said to him. He shrugged. "I live here too," he said. "I want to make sure this is being done right." She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it, and turned back to me. "You have until tomorrow at noon," she said. "After that, we tow it to the yard and you can fight with them about the fees." She walked back to the tow truck, said something to the driver, and then got into her own car, a white Lexus, parked across the street with the Lakeview Crest Commons Association decal in the windshield. The tow truck pulled away slowly, amber lights still flashing, and the neighbor stayed next to me until both vehicles were gone. "That was wild," he said. "She has been on a tear the last 2 months. I heard she pushed through a new tow policy without proper notice and the board just rubber-stamped it." I looked at him. "Do you remember when that happened?" He thought for a second. "Late August, maybe early September. There was a special meeting, but only about 6 people showed up. She sent an email blast the night before, real short notice." I thanked him and asked if he would be willing to say that again in writing or at a meeting. He said yes and gave me his email. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe because this story is just getting started. I went inside and plugged in my phone, then opened my email. The certified mail receipt was there, dated 3 days earlier, showing delivery to the management company office. I had requested every parking citation, every tow authorization, every board resolution related to parking enforcement, and every gate access log entry for my address, going back 6 months. I also requested the meeting minutes from the August and September board meetings, specifically any discussion or vote on parking policy changes. The management company had 10 business days to respond under state law, but I was betting Deborah had no idea the request was sitting in their inbox. I had moved into Lakeview Crest Commons in June after my divorce, and the HOA seemed fine at first. Standard stuff. No commercial vehicles. Trash cans off the curb by noon on pickup day. No loud music after 10. The parking rules were in the handbook I got at closing, and they were reasonable. 1 assigned space per unit, guest parking in the marked visitor lot, no overnight street parking without a permit. I got the permit decal, stuck it on my windshield per the instructions, and did not think about it again. Then, Deborah took over as Special Assessment Coordinator in July, and everything changed. The first sign was an email blast in early August titled Parking Compliance Initiative. It was 3 paragraphs of vague threats about guest abuse, fire lane safety, and a new partnership with a local tow vendor to ensure community standards. No specifics, no new rules posted, just a warning that enforcement would increase. A week later, I got a citation on my windshield saying my decal was not visible. I had the decal. It was right there, inside the windshield on the driver's side, exactly where the handbook said to put it. I emailed the management company and got a form reply saying the association was reviewing compliance and I should attend the next board meeting if I had concerns. The next board meeting was not for another month. 2 days after that, I came home to find a guest parking violation notice on my car, claiming I had parked in the visitor lot overnight. I had not. My car was in my driveway the entire time. I took photos with timestamps and emailed them to the management company. No response. Then I got a letter saying I owed a $50 fine for the violation, plus a $25 administrative fee, and if I did not pay within 15 days, it would accrue interest and could result in a lien. I called the management company. The person I spoke to said Deborah was handling all parking enforcement now and I should reach out to her directly. I emailed Deborah with the photos. She replied in one sentence, "The citation stands. Pay the fine or appeal to the board." I started keeping a file. Every email, every notice, every photo. I am an insurance fraud investigator, and my job is recognizing patterns when people try to manufacture claims or coverage gaps. This felt exactly like that. The violations were random, inconsistent, and escalating. Other residents started posting in the neighborhood Facebook group about getting citations for things that were not violations. And every time someone pushed back, Deborah would reply with some version of her catchphrase, "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." The board stayed silent. The management company stayed silent. And the tow truck started showing up. The vendor was a local outfit called Rapid Response Towing, and they had a contract with the association that nobody had seen. People would come home to find their cars hooked up or clamped, and the fees were always steep. $350 to remove a clamp, $450 to get your car back from the yard, plus daily storage. If you argued, Deborah would show up with a clipboard and the magnetic tow authorization placard, and the driver would proceed. A couple of residents paid under protest, and one guy tried to block the tow truck with his body. Deborah called the police. The officer who showed up told the guy to step aside, said it was a civil matter, and left. The car got towed. The guy paid $800 to get it back and moved out 2 months later. I was in a custody and visitation routine with my ex, and the HOA kept targeting my schedule and guests. My daughter stayed with me every other weekend, and my ex would drop her off Friday night. The driveway fit 1 car comfortably, 2 if you were careful, so my ex would park on the street for the 30 seconds it took to walk our daughter to the door. Deborah started issuing citations for that, claiming it was overnight street parking even though the car was there for less than a minute and it was still daylight. When I tried to get a second guest pass so my ex could park in the visitor lot during the exchange, Deborah said I was only entitled to 1 pass per household, and it was already assigned to my driveway decal. I pointed out that made no sense. She said the policy was the policy. Then my refinance application hit a snag. The title company found a notation in the county records that the HOA had flagged my account for possible lien action due to unpaid fines. I had not paid the fines because I was disputing them, but the flag was enough to spook the underwriter. They wanted a letter from the HOA confirming no liens were filed or pending. I requested the letter. Deborah said the association could not provide it until all fines were paid in full and I was current on assessments. I was current on assessments. The fines were disputed. She did not care. The refinance had a rate lock that expired in 3 weeks, and if I missed it, I would lose the lower rate and the monthly savings I needed to make the custody schedule work. That was when I knew this was not random. This was targeted. I filed the public records request the next day. Washington law is clear. An HOA has to produce records within 10 business days of a written request, and members are entitled to meeting minutes, financial records, contracts, and enforcement actions related to their property. I asked for everything, and I sent it certified mail so there would be no question about delivery. I also started documenting every interaction. I bought a portable battery pack so my phone would not die during confrontations, and I kept a notebook in my car with dates, times, and descriptions of every citation, every encounter, every threat. Deborah did not know I was building a case, but she was about to find out. The night of the clamp, I stayed up late writing a demand letter. I laid out the timeline, the inconsistent enforcement, the missing responses to my records request, and the fact that the parking policy Deborah was enforcing did not match the handbook I received at closing. I cited the Washington Homeowners Association Act sections on records access, due process, and enforcement procedures. I did not threaten to sue, but I made it clear I knew my rights and I was not going to roll over. I sent it to the management company, the board president, and Deborah, all by email with read receipts, and I copied myself on everything. Then I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to 3 things. First, a reply from the management company saying they were reviewing my records request and would respond within the statutory time frame. Second, an email from Deborah with the subject line "Final Warning," saying I had until noon to pay all outstanding fines and fees or the association would proceed with a lien and additional towing action. Third, a voicemail from the tow yard clerk, the same woman I had spoken to earlier, saying she needed to talk to me off the record and could I call her back before 9. I called her at 8:45. She answered on the first ring. "Look," she said, "I am not supposed to tell you this, but the paperwork your HOA gave us for your vehicle is a mess. The authorization is dated yesterday, but the violation notice on file is from last week, and the description does not match your car. We have a policy that we do not tow without a clean file, but my manager overrode it because your HOA lady, Deborah, she came in here and made a big scene, said we were under contract and if we did not move fast, she would find another vendor." I asked if she could send me a copy of the file. She said no, but she could confirm what was in it if I asked the right questions. I asked if the authorization had a board signature. She said no. I asked if the violation notice had a date and time stamp. She said yes, but the time was wrong by 6 hours. I asked if there was any documentation of a warning period. She said no. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called a tenant rights attorney I knew from a fraud case I had worked 2 years earlier. She did not do HOA law, but she knew someone who did. She gave me a name and number and I called him. He listened to the whole story, asked a few clarifying questions, and then said I had a solid case for improper enforcement, breach of the governing documents, and possibly harassment if I could show intent. He said he could write a nastier demand letter than mine for a flat fee, or he could represent me at the next board meeting for an hourly rate, or he could wait and see if the records request produced anything useful and go from there. I told him to hold off on the meeting but go ahead with the letter. He said he would have it done by end of business. At 11:30, Deborah sent another email. Last chance, it said, pay by noon or we proceed. I did not reply. At 12:15, the tow truck came back. This time, Deborah was not with it. The driver got out, looked at the clamp still on my wheel, and knocked on my door. I opened it. He looked tired. She told me to tow it, he said, but I am not doing it without her here. This whole thing feels wrong. I do not want to be in the middle of your HOA fight." I asked if he had a copy of the authorization. He shook his head. "She has it," he said. "I just have the work order, and it does not have half the info I need. If you want to file a complaint with the tow board, I will back you up. I will say the paperwork was incomplete." I thanked him and he left. 20 minutes later, my attorney emailed me a draft of his letter. It was 3 pages, single-spaced, and it did not mess around. It demanded an immediate response to the records request, a written explanation for every citation and fee, a halt to all collection and lien activity pending resolution, and a formal hearing before the board with the opportunity to present evidence and call witnesses. It said if the association did not comply, I would file a complaint with the Washington Attorney General and consider legal action for violations of the Homeowners Association Act, breach of contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I approved it, and he sent it out at 1:30. By 3, the management company called me. The woman on the phone sounded rattled. "We received your attorney's letter," she said. "We are working on your records request and we should have something for you by the end of the week." I asked about the lien threat. She said the association had not filed anything yet and she would make sure no action was taken until the board had a chance to review. I asked about the clamp. She said she would talk to Deborah. I said that was not good enough, I wanted it removed today. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said the tow vendor would remove it within 2 hours at no charge. I asked who authorized that. She said the board president did, after reviewing the situation. The driver came back at 4:30 and unlocked the clamp. He did not say much. I watched him load it into the truck, and then he drove off. I took photos of the whole thing, including the gouges the clamp had left in my wheel rim. Then I went inside and checked my email. The management company had sent a formal acknowledgement of my records request, along with an apology for the delay, and a promise to produce the documents by the end of the week. There was also an email from the board president, a guy named Tom who I had never spoken to, saying he wanted to schedule a call to discuss my concerns. I replied and said I was happy to talk, but I wanted everything in writing, and I reserved the right to have my attorney present. Tom called the next morning. He was polite, almost apologetic. He said the board had not been fully informed about the parking enforcement escalation, and when he read my attorney's letter, he realized there were gaps in the process. He said Deborah had been given authority to handle day-to-day compliance, but she was supposed to report to the board before taking major actions like towing or lien filings. He said he was going to call a special meeting to review the parking policy and the enforcement procedures, and he wanted me to be there. I said I would come, but I wanted the records first so I knew what I was dealing with. He agreed. The records arrived 3 days later, and they were even worse than I expected. The meeting minutes from August showed that Deborah had proposed a new parking policy, but there was no vote recorded. Just a note that the board had discussed it and agreed to move forward with enhanced enforcement. The September minutes had nothing about parking at all. The tow authorizations were a mess. Half of them had no board signature, no date, no violation description, just a vehicle make and model and a checkmark next to approved. The gate access log showed that my entry code had been disabled twice in the last month, once for 3 hours on a Tuesday morning and once for a full day the previous week. Nobody had notified me. I had assumed the gate was broken. The logs also showed that Deborah's access code had been used to enter my section of the community at odd hours, including twice after midnight. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He called me an hour later. "This is gold," he said. "The access log alone is enough to argue harassment, and the missing board votes mean the parking policy was never properly adopted. If they try to enforce it now, you can challenge every citation as void." He said he would come to the special meeting with me, and he would bring copies of the records to distribute to the board. He also said I should expect Deborah to push back hard, because if the board sided with me, her entire enforcement regime would collapse. The special meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening in the community clubhouse. I spent the weekend reviewing the records and drafting a timeline of every violation, every fee, every interaction. I also printed out the handbook I had received at closing and highlighted the sections that contradicted Deborah's enforcement actions. My attorney reviewed it and said it was solid. He told me to stay calm, stick to the facts, and let him handle the legal arguments. He said the goal was to get the board to admit the enforcement was improper, rescind the fines, and adopt a clear written policy with proper notice and due process. If they did that, I would drop the complaint threat and move on. If they did not, we would escalate. Monday night, Deborah sent an email blast to the entire community. The subject line was "Important Update on Parking Compliance." The body of the email was a masterpiece of spin. She said the association had been working hard to address parking abuse and improve community safety. And while some residents had raised concerns about the process, the board fully supported the enforcement actions taken to date. She said anyone with questions should attend the special meeting on Tuesday, but she wanted to be clear that the rules applied to everyone equally, and there would be no exceptions. She closed with her catchphrase, "If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." I forwarded it to my attorney. He replied with one word: "Perfect." Tuesday evening, I got to the clubhouse at 6:45. My attorney was already there, setting up a folder of documents on the table. About 20 residents were scattered around the room, more than I expected. A few of them came up to me and said they were there to support me, that they had gotten bogus citations too and they were tired of Deborah's tactics. One woman said Deborah had tried to tow her son's car during his college break because it did not have a guest pass, even though he lived there and the handbook said family members did not need one. Another guy said Deborah had fined him for parking in his own driveway because his truck was 6 inches over the property line into the common area. He measured it. It was not. Deborah arrived at 6:50, carrying a leather portfolio and her coffee tumbler. She sat at the front table with Tom and 2 other board members, a woman named Linda and a man named Greg. Tom called the meeting to order at 7 and said they were here to discuss parking enforcement procedures and address concerns raised by several residents. He said everyone would have a chance to speak, but he wanted to keep it civil and focused on solutions. Deborah immediately raised her hand. Tom nodded at her. She stood up. "I want to make something clear," she said. "The parking policy we have been enforcing is not new. It is based on the governing documents and the board's authority to maintain community standards. Some residents do not like being held accountable, and they are trying to create drama where there is none. If you follow the rules, you have nothing to worry about. If you do not, there are consequences. That is how an HOA works. If you want mercy, move somewhere without an HOA." She sat down. The room was silent for a beat, and then my attorney stood up. My attorney introduced himself and said he was there on my behalf. He said he had reviewed the governing documents, the meeting minutes, and the enforcement records provided by the management company, and he had identified several procedural deficiencies that raised serious legal questions. He said the August meeting minutes showed no formal vote on a parking policy change, which meant the policy Deborah was enforcing had never been properly adopted by the board. He said the tow authorizations were incomplete and inconsistent, which exposed the association to liability if a resident challenged a tow in court. He said the gate access logs showed my entry code had been disabled without notice, which violated my rights as a member. And he said the pattern of citations and fees directed at me combined with the email blast framing me as a problem resident suggested harassment rather than good faith enforcement. Deborah stood up again, her face red. That is ridiculous, she said. I have done everything by the book. The board gave me authority to handle parking, and that is what I have been doing. If your client has a problem with the rules, he should have come to a meeting instead of hiring a lawyer to bully us. My attorney did not react. He pulled a document from his folder and handed copies to Tom, Linda, and Greg. This is the handbook that my client received at closing, he said. It clearly states that residents are entitled to one assigned parking space and access to guest parking in the visitor lot, with no mention of overnight restrictions or decal visibility requirements. The policy Miss Miller has been enforcing contradicts the handbook, which means it is not valid unless the board amended the governing documents through a proper vote and provided notice to the membership. Did that happen? Tom looked at Deborah. Did we vote on this? He asked. Deborah hesitated. We discussed it in August, she said. Everyone agreed we needed stronger enforcement. Tom shook his head. Discussing it is not the same as voting on it, he said. If we did not vote, then we did not adopt a new policy. Deborah's jaw tightened. This is a technicality, she said. The intent was clear. My attorney spoke up again. Intent is not enough, he said. The governing documents require a formal vote for any policy change, and the minutes have to reflect it. If that did not happen, then every citation and fee issued under the new policy is void. Linda, the other board member, raised her hand. I want to say something, she said. I was at the August meeting, and I do not remember us voting on anything. Deborah presented some ideas and we said they sounded reasonable, but we did not take a formal vote. I assumed she was going to bring it back to us with a written proposal, but she never did. Greg nodded. Same here, he said. I thought this was still in the discussion phase. Deborah looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Tom sighed. Okay, he said, so we have a problem. We have been enforcing a policy that was never adopted. That is on us, and we need to fix it. One of the residents in the back raised his hand. I got fined $100 for parking my son's car in the visitor lot overnight, he said. If the policy was not valid, do I get my money back? Tom looked at the management company rep, who was sitting off to the side taking notes. She shrugged. If the board rescinds the citations, we can process refunds, she said. But that is a board decision. Tom looked at Deborah. How many citations have we issued under this policy? Deborah did not answer. Tom turned to the rep. Can you pull the numbers? The rep nodded and started typing on her laptop. A minute later, she said there had been 43 citations issued since August, totaling over $6,000 in fines and fees. The room erupted. People started shouting questions, asking if they were getting refunds, asking how this happened, asking why nobody noticed. Tom banged his hand on the table. Everyone calm down, he said. We are going to fix this. First, we are going to rescind every citation issued under the invalid policy. Second, we are going to refund every fine and fee that was paid. Third, we are going to draft a proper parking policy with input from the membership, and we are going to vote on it at the next regular meeting with full notice. Is that acceptable? The room quieted. Most people nodded. My attorney leaned over and whispered to me. That is the win, he said. Take it. But I was not done. I raised my hand. Tom nodded at me. I stood up. I appreciate the board acknowledging the problem, I said, but I still have not gotten an answer about the gate access logs. My entry code was disabled twice in the last month without notice. That is not a policy issue. That is targeted harassment. I pulled out a printed copy of the logs and held it up. These logs show that Deborah's access code was used to enter my section of the community at odd hours, including after midnight. I want to know why. Deborah's face went pale. Tom looked at her. Deborah, what is he talking about? Deborah stammered. I was doing patrol checks, she said, making sure there were no violations. I did not enter anyone's property. Tom frowned. At midnight? She did not answer. Linda spoke up. I think we need to look into this, she said. If a board member is using their access to surveil residents, that is a problem. Greg nodded. Agreed. Tom looked at me. Do you have a copy of those logs? I handed them to him. He studied them for a moment, then looked at Deborah. We are going to discuss this in executive session, he said. But I can tell you right now, this does not look good. The meeting went on for another hour, but the damage was done. Tom announced that the board would hold an emergency vote to rescind all parking citations, issue refunds, and suspend enforcement pending the adoption of a proper policy. He also said the board would review Deborah's role as special assessment coordinator and determine whether her authority needed to be revised. Deborah tried to object, but Linda cut her off. You overstepped, she said. You acted without board approval, you enforced rules that did not exist, and now we have a liability mess. We need to figure out how to fix this, and that might mean making changes. Deborah grabbed her portfolio and walked out. The coffee tumblers stayed on the table. After the meeting, several residents came up to me and thanked me. One woman said she had been too scared to fight back because Deborah had threatened to fine her daily until she gave up and cried. I told her that exact phrase was in my notes too, and it was going to be Exhibit A if the board did not follow through. My attorney packed up his folder and said he would send a follow-up letter to the management company confirming the board's commitments and requesting written confirmation of the refunds and policy suspension. He said if they tried to backtrack, we would file a complaint with the state attorney general, but he did not think it would come to that. The board knows they screwed up, he said. They are going to clean it up. The next day, I got an email from Tom. He said the board had voted unanimously in executive session to remove Deborah from the special assessment coordinator role and reassign parking enforcement to the management company. He said the board had also voted to issue a formal apology to me and the other residents who had been improperly cited, and to conduct an audit of all HOA enforcement actions over the past year to identify any other procedural gaps. He said the refunds would be processed within 2 weeks, and the new parking policy would be drafted with input from a resident committee. He asked if I would be willing to serve on the committee. I said yes. 2 weeks later, the refund check arrived, along with a letter from the management company confirming that all citations related to my account had been rescinded, and my access code had been restored with no restrictions. The letter also said the board had adopted a new policy prohibiting any board member from using their access code to enter private sections of the community without prior notice, and a documented reason. The tow vendor contract had been terminated, and the association was soliciting bids from other companies with stricter oversight requirements. Deborah did not show up to the next board meeting. Rumor had it she was considering resigning from the board entirely, but she had not made it official yet. In the meantime, the parking committee met twice, and we drafted a policy that was actually reasonable. 1 assigned space per unit guest parking in the visitor lot with a 24-hour limit, no overnight street parking without a permit that could be requested online, and a clear appeals process for an HOA citation. The board voted to adopt it at the September meeting, and it passed unanimously. The whole thing took 3 months from the first clamp to the final policy vote, and it cost me about $2,000 in legal fees, but it was worth it. I got my refund, I got my access restored, and I got a parking policy that made sense. More importantly, I got the entire board to admit that Deborah had been operating outside her authority, and I got her removed from the enforcement role. That was the real win. But the best part, the part that still makes me smile, came at the October board meeting. Deborah showed up, apparently having decided not to resign after all, and she tried to downplay the whole thing. She said the parking enforcement had been a good faith effort to address community concerns, and while there were some procedural missteps, the intent was always to improve safety and standards. She said nobody had complained until I made a big deal out of it, and she implied that the whole mess was my fault for being difficult. Tom let her finish, and then he opened a folder and pulled out a stack of papers. These are complaints we received about parking enforcement between August and now, he said. There are 37 of them. They were submitted to the management company, and we did not see them because they were not forwarded to the board. I asked the management company why, and they said Deborah told them not to, that she would handle the complaints directly. He looked at Deborah. Did you handle them directly? Deborah did not answer. Tom continued, because according to these complaints, you did not respond to a single one. You just kept issuing citations. Karen says nobody complains, and a stack of complaints appears. The room laughed, and Deborah's face turned red. She tried to say something, but Tom held up his hand. We are not doing this again, he said. The policy is in place, the refunds are done, and we are moving forward. If you want to stay on the board, you need to follow the process like everyone else. Linda moved to table Deborah's comments. Greg seconded. The motion passed. Deborah sat down and did not say another word for the rest of the meeting. Karen is outvoted so hard the room laughs. 2 weeks later, she submitted her resignation. The board accepted it without discussion. The HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess, and the whole enforcement structure got rebuilt from scratch. The new policy worked because it was clear, it was voted on, and it was applied evenly. The tow vendor contract included a clause requiring the association to provide complete documentation for every tow, and the management company instituted a monthly audit to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. My attorney sent a final letter closing out the matter, and I have not had a single parking issue since. I still live in Lakeview Crest Commons, and I still serve on the parking committee. My daughter still visits every other weekend, and my ex parks in the visitor lot during the exchange without getting cited. The refinance went through, the rate locked, and I saved enough on the monthly payment to make the custody schedule work. The neighborhood is quieter now, and people are not constantly looking over their shoulder for the next bogus citation. A couple of residents have thanked me for standing up to Deborah, and one guy bought me a beer at the community barbecue. He said I did what everyone else wanted to do but was too scared to try. The tow yard clerk who helped me left that company and started working for a competitor. She sent me a LinkedIn message a few months later saying she was glad things worked out, and she hoped the new vendor was better. I told her she was a key witness even if she never testified, and I appreciated her honesty when it mattered. The tow operator who refused to hook my car without Deborah present apparently quit too. I saw him driving for a different company a while back and he waved. I waved back. The gate access logs are still public record, and I check them every few months just to make sure nobody is pulling the same stunt Deborah did. So far, it has been clean. The board is more transparent now, and they post meeting agendas and minutes on the community website within 48 hours. The parking policy is on there too, along with the complaint form and the appeals process. It is not perfect, but it is a hell of a lot better than it was. Looking back, the thing that made the difference was not the attorney or the records request or even the meeting. It was the decision to start collecting evidence the moment I realized this was not random. I work in fraud investigation, and I know that patterns do not lie. Deborah thought she could overwhelm me with citations and fees and threats, and she thought the board would back her because nobody else had pushed back. She was wrong on both counts. The board backed down the second they saw the legal exposure, and the complaints appeared the second someone asked for them. The whole thing collapsed because it was built on nothing. If you are dealing with an HOA that is crossing the line, here is what I learned. First, know your governing documents. Read the handbook, read the bylaws, read the state law. If the HOA is enforcing something that is not in the documents, they are on shaky ground. Second, document everything. Dates, times, names, photos, emails, letters. If it is not written down, it did not happen. Third, request records. Most states have laws requiring HOAs to provide meeting minutes, contracts, and enforcement actions. If they refuse or delay, that is a red flag. Fourth, find an attorney who knows HOA law. Not all attorneys do, and the ones who do not will waste your time and money. Fifth, do not go it alone. Talk to your neighbors, build a coalition, show up at meetings. The board is more likely to back down if they see that multiple people are paying attention. And sixth, be ready to follow through. I filed a records request, hired an attorney, and showed up at meetings with evidence. If I had not been willing to do that, Deborah would have kept going. The board would have kept ignoring it, and I would have ended up paying thousands in bogus fees or losing my refinance or both. The system works if you use it, but you have to be willing to use it. I am glad I fought back, and I am glad it worked out. The neighborhood is better for it, and I have a parking policy I can live with. Deborah is gone, the tow vendor is gone, and the board is finally doing its job. It took 3 months, $2,000, and a lot of late nights, but it was worth it. If you are in a similar situation, do not assume the HOA has all the power. They do not. You have rights, and if you are willing to stand up for them, you can win. I am glad you made it to the end.